What's up, squad? It's Brandon from the Bantu Sun. Thanks so much for joining us today. So I want to get into the conversation about what's going on in Sudan. I've been pacing myself trying to put the pieces together and seeing how these different factions align to see if I can get the bigger picture of what's really going on. But it's been relatively difficult to do so. And I think I touched on the reason why, and I'll get into that later in this video. But what's most important is that we understand that right now there is more or less a civil war going on in Sudan, especially in its capital city, Khartoum. And in that in itself is insane to me. Imagine a New York City or a London or a Beijing under siege by competing military forces, both of them from your own country, fighting it out over a power struggle, and then the humanitarian crisis that's creating as an after effect. But to get into where we at today, I want to go back into basically the military coup that overthrew the previous prime minister of the late 80s, Prime Minister Mahdi. And basically since the early 90s until 2019, there has been military or authoritarian leadership of the country under General Omar al-Bashir. Now, General or President Bashir was in turn taken out of power by the military. And since he was taken out in 2019, the country has a transition, but it's primarily under General Abdel al-Burhan. So he's the head of the armed forces in Sudan and one of the military forces that are fighting things out in the streets of Khartoum right now. So the reason why I want to go back to that, because this sets the tone and the tenor of the country. This has not been a people's party or the support of the everyday man. Sudan has been ruled by basically under the rule of the mighty fist for the last 3 decades. Now, how does this affect what's going on today? Well, a lot of the issues that's going on is the successionist nature and the intertribal conflict amongst the Sudanese. For instance, Sudan was a bigger country than it is now. Well, you have to remember the country did split in 2011 between what is modern day Sudan and South Sudan. And that conflict arose, or a lot of people based that conflict in the roles of the northern or the Sudanese Arabs of the north in modern day Sudan against the more, we'll say, multi-ethnic, Nilo-Saharan populations of South Sudan, which were not necessarily Islamic. We would say they were not Islam, made up of various different religious sects. But supposedly the northern Sudanese Arabs, outnumbering the South Sudanese, 4-1, were pushing their power and authority on the South and using their religion and their government to punish and weaken the South. And this was very unfortunate because this was a mighty country. Even today, Sudan is still a massive country. It's the 3rd largest country in Africa. It's nearly twice the size of Egypt. But the North and the South fell out over this. And the South eventually decided to vote to succeed from the country. Cutting off a very vital point, Sudan is very rich in natural resources, especially South Sudan, one of the most fertile countries on the African continent, and it was very oil rich. And it was this great harmonious marriage because you had the oil being produced or made from South Sudan, which traveled pipelines to the Red Sea onto global markets. So it was symbiotic, so to speak, but they just couldn't get the relationship right. And you really hate to see that because Sudan, this is a missed opportunity. It could have set the tone as a gateway between that northern Arab Africa and that more sub-Saharan, Nilotic sub-Saharan portion of Africa. Remember, Khartoum is pretty much the gateway between the north and the south. It's in Khartoum, where the blue Nile from Ethiopia meets with the white Nile that goes down as far south as Uganda. It meets in Sudan. So it's not only symbolically the center of the heartland or the joining of Africa, but it is literally, physically, the joining of the great Nile River, which flows into Sudan up through Egypt, which over 100 million Egyptians' livelihood depends on. So you have the breaking up the country of the South. That's one issue. But just as big as issue that feed in today was the issue in Darfur. Now, many may not know, but the words may seem or ring true, is that in Western Sudan, there's a region called the Darfur. So the Darfur region began to build up animosity against the central government, same reasons as South Sudan. They were not appreciative of the leadership of the Sudanese Arab, and they felt as though the Sudanese Arab was trying to establish a monopoly of power within the country. These groups, Darfur itself, which means land of the fur, these fur people and similar kin, mostly from the Lake Chad regions of Central Africa, or can date their ancestors a little bit closer to the Canaan-Bordeaux Empire of Central Africa. These groups came together, formed a coalition, called themselves the Sudanese Liberation Movement Army. Now, this group, in doing so, in Darfur, they began to attack institutions of power and structure within Darfur belonging to the central government. In response, the central government obviously had to send out the military to try to put down this resurrection. Well, all the things going on and the Central Sudanese force inability to put things down or establish some type of peace and stability within the country, there arose Sudanese Arab militias from the Darfur region. So what you have here, you have the SLM, the Sudanese Liberation Movement out there, giving the work to the Sudanese armed forces. And the Sudanese armed forces are like, look, we can't handle all this. They're struggling to put down the resurrections in Darfur, and they make an alliance with basically a Sudanese Arab militia group called the Janjaweed. And out of this Janjaweed group grow the modern day RSF, Rapid Support Forces in Sudan. And pretty much how this synergy worked is this group worked as the foot soldiers. They were the muscle of the central government out in Darfur to put down this resurrection. And this leads, some of their actions lead to what will be called the Darfur genocide. Because this was not an organized, or we would say a standardized military, but a militia under the guise of a warlord, this group had really, they didn't sign the Geneva Convention. They took no prisoners, and they carried out very intense methods to put down the resurrections within the Darfur region. And over time, this group became very powerful. Of course, you have the central government in Sudan with an alliance towards Saudi Arabia, towards UAE. Anything in the Arab League that's formalized and empowered is most likely in cahoots or working with the Sudanese or in the Emiratis. They are the financial backers. These are the money backs, and not just for that portion of the world, but they are basically the bank of the Islamic world, so to speak. They're heavily laden with resource wealth, and they're able to move muscles beyond their border. So this RSF group becomes super strong because they have the support of the central government, as well their leader, a general that rose up. Some people would say was might be a camel trader or a camel raider, depending on whose side of the story you believe. But their general, Mohammed Dagalo, aka General Hamedi, rose to prominence. Now, in doing so, they realized, they found a way to basically enrich themselves by this role as the muscle of the Sudanese Arabs, or the Arabs in more broader sense of that region. They were building alliances with Muammar Gaddafi, as well as what some would say some Arabian Gulf countries. And so they're getting stronger and stronger. They discovered gold mines in Darfur. They're taxing trade now. These guys are getting big. Eventually, as General Burhan comes into power, he deputizes General Hamidi, makes him a top guy in Sudan. And there's good reason to. General Hamidi solves a lot of people problems. They've said that he's in some of the industries that he's rumored to be a part of, right? Gold trade out of the fur, sending weapons to Central African Republic, mitigating some of the exodus of African migrant labor to the Mediterranean onto Europe. So some people actually say he's in cahoots with some European organizations to try to stem the tide of African migrant labor outside of North Africa. Since the fall of Gaddafi, everyone knows that African migrant labor has been a major source of contention between the Mediterranean countries of Europe and Africa. As well, there are even rumors that General Hamidi forces were sent to Yemen in support of the Saudis and Emiratis airstrikes against the Houthis. So this General Hamidi is very resourceful, very adroit, and he knows how to solve people's problems. And that's what gets us to this situation today. You have this very resourceful, very ambitious general from the Western regions now in the capital. And for some reason, somebody gave him the green light to go ahead with this. And this is what I say, it's hard for me to wrap my arms around this. The response by the world was to leave. Basically, people are emptying their embassies, getting their citizens out, and then letting this situation solve itself more or less. Outside of the talking, this is what they're saying. There's a famous saying that Alexander the Great, on his deathbed, his general said, who's going to inherit the empire? And he said, Hotito Kratistos, aka also known as, in translation, to the strongest, to the best. And it seems like this is what's happening. And the reason I think this is, and I cannot prove this, but I just think it's because both these generals, General Burhan and General Hamidi, they have the same backers. And because of that, the backers, it's no one that's going to come down. I'm trying to figure out why aren't people coming in support of the recognized government, the armed forces of Sudan. Why does General Hamidi feel so confident that he can win a civil war against the standardized army? Unless he's getting some backing. So people are not competing, and there's a recognized sovereignty of this land, and they're just letting the generals fight this out. That's what seemed like is prevailing at this point. So I think this is the reason why it's been a failed ceasefire. It's because if you don't have these two sides going at it, but you have one side who probably don't trust either one of them and just trying to figure out who is going to be the best guy that can move Sudan forward, who has the network and the power to get that done. A couple other things I want to call out. One, it shows be useful to people. As I always talk about, you see things or unfortunate things happen in the world. Haiti continuously go through hard times. And I always say, Haiti needs to be useful to people. Haiti needs to solve people's problems. And I think this is the flip of that. You have this general who may not be the nicest guy in the world, but he solves a lot of people's problems. And in doing so, he has given himself a lot of leeway to challenge the central authority of the country. Why? Because he provides soldiers, he provides weapons, he provides gold, and a whole other commerce. This man, Hamidi, even if they kick Hamidi out the capital, I think he's going to find phenomenal support in the deep recesses of the western parts of the country, because his network goes through Chad, Libya, Central African Republic. So he's going to be if it was a possible way to defeat him, it's going to be very difficult to root him out, because you're going to have to go into his home field sooner or later. And lastly, I wanted to comment on the fact that I think that it's very interesting that the last publicly the last democratically elected leader of Sudan, Prime Minister Sadiq al-Mahdi. A lot of people consider his legacy was that of a centrist. It's so much craziness going on in Sudan. Sudan is a big, beautiful country. You see these photos, and it's crazy. You can see how beautiful the city of Khartoum is, with the Nile slithering through the capital city, like just adding this magnificent beauty to it. And it's so old and ancient, like Kingdom of Kush, the Kandakis, the Candaces of old, like known for great history. I know Sudan has the most pyramids in the world. It's a phenomenal country, and to see it going through this issue is quite unfortunate. But when you see that the last prime minister, when the Sudanese were allowed to make an election, when you look past the chaos, there's this military chaos. This is what the militias and the army and the RSF is doing to the country. When you look past the violence, when you look past the military coups, and you see what the people want, because that's what this all comes from, right? The instability of the government comes from somebody trying to get control of the country. The people keep rebelling, and the people are asking for democratic elections, but somehow it's being interpreted as more military rule. So, but if you look past that, you get a prime minister, Sadiq al-Mahdi, an Oxford man, a person that believes in political debate, free press, a person that believes in openness, integration with different religious groups. You get this secular figure, this centrist, I'll say a centrist, let's say this. You get a centrist, a person that was up for open and had a broad understanding and appreciation of what Sudan was. And this is when the people had a chance to speak their voice. It's going to be interesting where Sudan goes from here, and hopefully the suffering and this chaos doesn't last too much longer. We're going to be on the lookout, and we'd love to hear your thoughts, concerns, and questions below on what you think is transpiring now in one of the great countries on this planet. Until next time, take care. Oh, and like, subscribe, and share if you enjoyed the video. But until next time, take care. Bantu out.